Many climbers have a fascination with last great projects, particularly when they have a history that includes some of the biggest names in the sport. And 2026 is starting with one of those. Erwin Legrand, son of legendary French climber Francois Legrand, has unlocked the opening sequence and come close to doing the famous 1991 Marc Le Ménestrel project, Les Bombes Bleues, in Buttes. But what you might not know is that in June of 2025, a 36-year-old project at Smith Rock in the US was finally finished by Kyle Higby. And this one was initially tried by none other than Alan Watts, Ron Kauk, and Wolfgang Güllich. And the story of its birth is kind of wild. In 1988, Alan Watts had only recently wrapped his head around the idea that Smith Rock was one of the most important destinations in climbing, and that the routes he'd envisioned were the driving force. And it was because of a Mountain magazine cover in 1986 that people from around the world had been coming to Smith. And there was one new line that Alan had envisioned that he couldn't get out of his head: a soaring double arête up the backside of the iconic spire, the monkey face, that he dubbed the backbone. He bolted the stunning line in 1988 and worked on it on and off while putting most of his energy toward the existing trilogy of 514s at Smith: White Wedding, Scarface, and To Bolt or Not to Be. And then, in 1989, climber and cinematographer Mike Hoover, who'd worked on the Eiger Sanction and had taught Clint Eastwood to climb for the film, reached out to Alan about an idea for an NBC Sportsworld show. They wanted to film a first ascent at Smith, and they wanted to bring in Wolfgang Güllich and Ron Kauk to help out. To prep for the show, Alan wrapped down one of the most impressive faces of the monkey and spent 2 days cleaning and bolting an imposing line. And the day before Wolfgang was due to fly in, he and Kauk gave it a handful of tries, but quickly realized that the line will be too difficult to do in the couple of days that they had, not to mention doing it on command for a television show. In fact, that line would resist all efforts until 1992, when Higby Tribu would finally make it to the top without falling and call it Just Do It. And I tell the full story of that ascent on the Written in Stone podcast and in my book, Written in Stone, the 1990s. And fun fact, pre-orders of the book by our patrons came with signed photos of either Lynn Hill on the nose or Higby on Just Do It. The link to the book and our free Patreon is in the description. Anyway, Alan knew he had to come up with something else for the show, so he offered up that soaring double arête that he'd bolted back in 1988. Wolfgang had arrived at Smith, so while he and Kauk got to work on the upper section, which Alan had already worked out for himself, Alan got to work bolting a direct start up an improbable-looking arête directly below the backbone to create one giant 400-foot sport route. Alan's original vision for that upper double arête was to stay on the right, making the grade around 13C. But while Wolfgang and Kauk were up there, they realized that they could traverse left around the corner and use rest holds to drop the grade down to 13A. And Alan actually sent me his hand-drawn topo from 1988 for that section. And I'll be talking more about that in another video coming up. The trio then got to work on the new pitch, but soon realized it was also too difficult to do in the time they had available. There was a short section they just couldn't work out. However, they did realize that at a rest halfway up the pitch, immediately after the first crux, they could make a short traverse to the right and climb a crack that avoided what was sure to be a 514 crux, then make their way back left and to the base of the backbone. And this dogleg around the crux was about 12 plus. And they named it Sheer Trickery. And on the day of the shoot, all three did Sheer Trickery on their second try before Kauk and the film crew made their way up the entire formation. Alan Watts recently sent me a VHS recording of the entire television show.
Up next, an NBC Sportsworld special. Danger.
Which I'll be putting up on this channel soon, along with commentary from some emails Alan sent me about what's really happening, since the Hollywood edit didn't exactly capture the whole truth. But the envisioned line, the one that went straight up the arête, just never got done. Over the years, many strong climbers, including a young Drew Ruana fresh off ascent of Just Do It, would attempt the line, but its secrets remained hidden. In Alan Watts' 1992 guide, he writes, Project 513 plus, ? The entire edge of sheer trickery remains undone. A bleak sequence on perfect rock between the 3rd and 6th bolts foils all attempts. The most recent book calls it a possible 14 plus and mentions that there's some debate among elite climbers about whether it's even possible. But the debate has been settled. Kyle Higby had been spending some time in Smith, and when Alan Watts told him about the unclimbed arête, he checked it out, and he was hooked. After working the extremely technical moves on top rope, Higby gave somewhere between 10 and 20 red point attempts with no success. But on his final day at Smith, in June of 2025, he went back for one final session. And after an initial scary upside-down fall and nearly calling it quits due to the incoming sun and summer heat, clouds rolled in, along with a light wind, and convinced Kyle to tie in again. With local legend Cat Kevin Rose hanging on the neighboring crack and filming, he gave it one last go. The crux of this route is as much mental as physical, and during a run out of 20 moves that just don't quite offer enough stability to really chalk or shake or clip. Kyle writes, "I don't remember most of the way up, but somehow I found myself setting up for the long reach at the end of the hard climbing. I stuck the jug, then suddenly, very aware I had little gas left to pull myself up like I usually did. I refused to fall there though, and threw beta out the window and yelled my head off to pop my feet up.
Yeah.
It was then only a couple moves to the rest, but I had to force myself to calm down to be able to move again."
Yeah.
I'm really proud to have freed Alan's original vision to the start of the backbone, 36 years later. And like you get a few glimpses of in the video, the tailbone, which is what Kyle named the new route, giving it 14A, is pretty close to the crack that sheer trickery doglegs to. But as someone who's developed a fair amount of rock climbing, there's just something alluring about the original vision, same as Alan was trying up high on the arête. The harder sequence that ultimately you find a way around, making the route easier. I know that feeling well, and I understand why, especially with the bolts already installed out there, that Alan held on to that vision for all those years, convincing people to try it. And after all, what is climbing if it's not following a vision? If we're honest, most bouldering and sport climbing are pretty arbitrary, and even some trad climbing. Follow this crack, not that one. That one's a different variation. It's all just part of this game that we play. Where climbing used to be about finding the easiest path up a piece of rock, it's become more about finding harder and harder ways. Personally, I'm glad that's the game. I love it. And I'm happy for Kyle for adding to the history and for Alan for getting to see his original vision completed. And for more climbing history, subscribe, turn on the notifications, and check out my book, Written in Stone, the 1990s. We're working on the 80s right now, and be on the lookout for the full TV show from 1989 with Wolfgang, Ron, and Alan coming soon on this channel. See you guys next time.